Welcome to Sartor TV. I'm Vanessa Tyler. Are you ready to take your company to the next level? But first, you must be fit for growth. Here to get us in shape is Dr. Deniz Caglar. Thank you for joining us. Tell us a little bit about your success journey. How'd you get here from there?
Well, I've been with PwC Strategy End for the past 3 years or so. It's been just about 3 years since PwC acquired my former firm, Booz & Company. We used to be Booz Allen Hamilton. Before that, we split up into 2 business units, and I went with Booz & Company back in 2008. And I started with Booz Allen Hamilton back in 2001 after I had finished my PhD in operations research. It's to this day, it's a love of mine, that I find a fascinating topic. And after working on my dissertation for 4 years at Northwestern University, got my doctorate and decided to leave academia and join the consulting world. And I've been with our firm, which changed names a few times already, but I've been with our firm over the past 16 years now, coming up almost 17 for me. And it's been a great journey. And over my career, I've been through quite a few learning journeys, starting with my PhD program and learning about consulting, working with clients, and more recently learning to write a book and be able to tell a story to a broad audience.
The book, Fit for Growth.
It is.
Who did you write the book for?
We wrote it for executives in all sizes and shapes all sizes and shapes, all sectors, and all geographies in the world. Frankly, perhaps it's ambitious and perhaps a little arrogant to think that what we have is actually applicable to everybody. And at the same time, we believe that we have a topic that is indeed applicable to many executives, many companies in the world. It is a topic very relevant, very timely, that everybody needs to be fit to survive in this really complex, really fast-changing world. And what you perhaps did in the past is not going to be sufficient for you to succeed going into the future. It is, if I can borrow an expression, it's the survival of the fittest. And we're looking to help organizations, help executives get and stay fit.
Interesting, you said all over the world. And in fact, you've just come from kind of like an international tour with the book. Are you finding it the same issues internationally as we're having nationally?
Yes, as you mentioned, I was recently traveling to talk about the book in several countries. I've been to Australia, Singapore, and Thailand recently, and I'm looking to travel to Mexico and China, and my colleague traveling to England and Japan in the next few weeks as well. So far, between the distribution of the book and the sales of the book and the anecdotes we're hearing, and specifically our trips to these countries, we're finding a very similar response, a very similar reaction. It is very timely. Everybody is challenged with this complex, fast-changing world and the difficult times we're facing. Everybody's pursuing that elusive growth and at the same time struggling to manage their organizations and cost structure. So it is perhaps there are small variations and some nuances, but it is a very common theme across the world.
Take us through the Fit for Growth framework at a macro level.
Okay, so we believe, we advocate that organizations need to be fit to be able to compete effectively. Perhaps not a novel concept, a simple self-explanatory concept, but fitness comes in 3 forms. That organizations need to have a set of capabilities that they constantly invest in. We call them the differentiating capabilities that set them apart from their competitors. That gives them that competitive fitness, competitive strength, and they need to be stronger in those capabilities than any of their competitors. The second is they need to manage their cost structure. Investing in capabilities requires money, funds, and nobody has too much money these days, right? Everybody's struggling with limited funding, limited budgets. So somehow they need to come up with the money to be able to invest in the areas that are going to fuel their growth. And that's to managing the cost structure. How can you reduce your costs in areas that matter less to your growth, free up the money, and then be able to invest them into the areas that matter more to the growth? And then the third element is the organization. Organization must be aligned, must be supportive, must be in line with the company strategy to be able to execute effectively. And if you're looking to save costs, the organization must be able to support it. If you're looking to build differentiating capabilities, the organization must be able to support it. So it is about capabilities, costs, and organization. And underlying all of that, often this calls for a big change. So we help organizations, or the Fit for Growth framework discusses how to manage the change, leveraging an organization's culture and internal strengths. So that's the macro level, I hope.
Do you find a lot of companies have gotten off mission, and maybe that's why they're
maybe
a little
not
out of alignment?
mission, but what we find is in our research, 50% of companies, almost 50% of the companies are what we call distracted. That they have basically, in pursuit of growth or looking for new avenues to go after, they've diluted their focus and they've gotten away from their core, who they used to be, and what their identity is and what made them successful in the past. By expanding too far, they've stretched their resources, they've stretched their capabilities, and they just can't get to everything they want to do. So they're distracted, they're spreading their resources, their time too far across too many competing priorities, and they can't get anything done. So that's our Fit for Growth framework calls for focusing on a handful of differentiating capabilities that are true to companies' identity, who they are, and how they succeed, and invest in those consistently.
Do you always need to cut to grow? How can leaders distinguish the part of cost cutting will truly be to their distinct advantage?
Yes, it's a very interesting question. So I'll say the short answer is yes, but there's nuances to that. And perhaps I'll phrase it a little differently. You don't always have to cut necessarily, but you always have to manage your cost structure as efficiently as you can, as effectively as you can. And 2 or 3 things to pay attention to are, one is, what are you spending your money on? And how much of the money you're spending is aligned with the growth priorities, the differentiating capabilities that you want to build and strengthen, versus the rest of what needs to happen, the housekeeping stuff, what we call lights on. Simply keep the lights on in the building, in the operations in the company, or basic table stakes that if you want to compete in a certain industry, you have to have those capabilities. So how much of your money are you spending on basic necessities versus what truly differentiates you and gives that competitive muscle? And what we advocate is that you have to continuously look at that allocation of the resources against those 3 things, differentiating table stakes versus lights on, and must make sure that you balance them continually. Sometimes companies get out of whack and costs get out of proportion and they have to rebalance in a more dramatic fashion. That's when cost cutting happens. Other times you might be able to just tweak on the course of business as usual, and not drastic cost reductions, but perhaps hold your breath a little bit and maybe go on a little bit of a hiring freeze, or do a little bit of tweaking here and there for 6 months, 12 months and get back in shape. So, maybe if you're over 30 pounds overweight, you're doing the crash diet to get back in shape. But if you're 5 pounds over, maybe watching that extra cup of coffee might make a difference.
What are the factors to be considered in determining whether a company is fit for growth or not?
Sure.
Are all companies ready to grow?
No, actually. Going back to research I mentioned, we did some research. We looked at 200 public companies based on publicly available information to understand who's fit and who's not. And so we have a test that we developed, our Fit for Growth Index. It's available publicly, online. Today, we've evolved that to 25 questions. You can take that in 10 minutes or less and get a self-diagnosis, basically, of your organization. Well, when we did the research, what we found out was only 10% of the companies are actually fit for growth. And the way we describe fitness is the alignment of those 3 principles I mentioned earlier. Do you have a clear set of differentiating capabilities that you're investing in? Is your cost structure aligned to those differentiating capabilities? And is your organization supportive? So what Fit for Growth companies do is those 3 things right at the same time over time. And what we find is 90% of the companies either can't do all these 3 things right at the same time, or they do it right a little bit, but then they lose focus and then they get out of shape and they're not fit anymore. So fitness comes in 3 shapes then. One is, are you investing in the right capabilities? Do you have a clear strategy that's actually specific? What we find a lot of companies say our strategy is to grow our revenue and reduce our costs so that we're more profitable. It's just too broad, not specific enough. So consistent with that strategy, then are you investing your resources in the right places? The second element is the cost structure. Are you continuously putting your resources where they matter more? Are you able to take cost out of the places that matter less? And then the third is the organization behind it. Do you make decisions fast? Are your people accountable for results? Do you have the right metrics and measures in place and incentives in place to be able to drive your organization to execute the strategy? So that's what we look at to understand if a company is fit.
Do you make decisions fast? That sounds pretty scary for a lot of companies.
Yes, you don't want to be rash, absolutely. And what we see, though, in many, many organizations, decision making is just what's the right word here? It just takes so long, so cumbersome, so frustrating. And especially if you're a middle manager in an organization, to be able to do anything requires 3 levels of approvals. And you can imagine every level of approval might take 2 weeks, a month to schedule a meeting, show what you've got, and then be able to actually get a decision, only take it to the next level up. And then the cycles go through, and then before a decision can be made, months go by, while the more nimble competitors are acting faster and taking market share and growing their businesses. So we find a lot of organizations struggle with making effective decisions fast. And in a fit-for-growth organization with clear boundaries, clear accountabilities, clear decision rights, organizations can and do move faster to be able to actually capture the opportunities in the marketplace.
How does a company prepare for growth? They're ready to do it. You mentioned those things. What do we do next? What do we do tomorrow?
Sure. Let me perhaps give you a straw man first, what we see a lot of companies do for preparing for growth and why that's wrong is a fallacy, and then what we think they should do instead. When companies want to go prepare for growth, they actually think about what products do I sell, or what are the customers I want to go after, or what are the markets that I want to go after, which is really natural, right? This is what are we going to sell to who and where and how we're going to get it done. And it can actually have an adverse impact that it can lead organizations to be distracted. They get out of their core, they get out of their focus, who they are, by chasing growth in all sorts of adjacencies. They pursue a capability system that's not coherent with who they are. And ultimately, they end up wasting their resources, right? They do not pursue the right things in the right way. They end up wasting their resources, and that elusive growth they're chasing does not materialize because they're not going after the right things. What we recommend is companies double down on their differentiating capabilities on who they are, what they do, right? If I give you the Amazon example, when they first started out, they were a bookstore, right? A bookstore retailer online. But look at them today, they sell just about everything that you can think of, but it's about who they are. They're doing exactly what they've done the past 15, 20 years. They're only doing it in better and better and better. And now they're able to expand that to many more product lines and into more geographies, go after more customer segments. So that's what we advocate, recommend organizations do. Focus on your differentiating capabilities. Focus on who you are, what you do, rather than what you sell. By investing in what you do and who you are, you create that competitive muscle, that competitive differentiation that others cannot replicate you or your products and go after your customers. You have a capability that cannot be replicated that gives you a true, enduring advantage over your competitors, and then growth follows.
Wow, so you kind of like building a stronger framework.
Absolutely.
And within that you can just...
And then you can apply into the products and services that lend themselves to that framework, right? When we try to be everything to everybody, we lose who we are. And ultimately that spells disaster. And they've been very successful at what they do, and they're growing even faster and faster.
In Chapter 3, you talk about the leader's role in aligning costs with strategy.
Yes.
Tell us, how does that work? Is there a framework or process to follow for that?
Maybe I'll call 3 principles for CEOs or the executive team to follow. The first one is they need to make the case to the organization, energize the organization. Right? It's any type of restructuring is scary. And people hear the word restructuring, they think of all sorts of nightmare scenarios, and which are sometimes true, not to undermine, minimize it, which are sometimes true that those fears are not completely unfounded. But so the CEO or the executive team must make the case for change and energize the organization. Why should the company, why should the people in the organization get behind this? Why is this the right thing to do? How do we know that this is different and this is going to work when we've tried something similar 10 times in the last 5 years maybe, and we've been burned, and you're telling me now this is the right thing at this time and you finally figured it out? Tell me how this is going to work. It's a difficult case to make. You have to be really convincing to the organization, compelling, and it only comes through honest, candid, frank conversations with the organization, or acknowledging where you're starting from, giving a picture of where you're going, and why this is going to succeed now. So that's the first step. The second is then they must really restructure. That it cannot be about belt-tightening or across-the-board cuts at 10%, and everybody must be true to the identity of the company, must play to the company's strengths, the differentiating capabilities, and take the cost out much more aggressively from places that matter less. So that it is indeed getting in shape. You are getting on that treadmill. You are lifting the weights. It's not just a crash diet and just for a week, I'm not going to eat anything and drop 5 pounds, right? It is going to make a difference. It's going to change who you are, what you do, and it is actually going to be sustainable. So you have to put the work in. And then you have to put the process behind it, that you have to go through it systematically. That's the third element, that you have to follow a robust, systematic process rather than an edict that says, we're taking 10% of cost out, find your bottom 10% of the employees and let them go in 3 months, right? That is just the crash diet that's calling for a disaster. And that's what a lot of companies are used to doing. And when the times get tough, they go after these across-the-board cuts that are drastic, but ultimately unsustainable, and that completely destroy the morale in the company. But when you go through a thoughtful process, when you evaluate the value of every spending item, how much is this one item supporting our growth ambitions and what we want to be in the future? And then you can make intelligent, thoughtful choices on, we're going to spend our money here, we're going to cut back here. And the organization sees it. Right? It is then not simply a slash and burn exercise, but an investment into the future of the company. As hard as it is for the people who are affected, it is a much more promising and hopeful and optimistic future for the people who are left in the organization.
All right. It's not just about going after employees. Oftentimes when you hear cost cutting or we're going to grow and we're changing, that's often what happens.
It is often a euphemism for taking 10% cost out, right? It is, and that's how leaders can destroy trust in the organization and morale in the organization. When employees see that beyond the fancy words, the actions are actually completely different, then that's when they lose trust and they lose hope and they lose their confidence in the leadership in the organization. And it doesn't only affect the people who are leaving, but also the people who are left behind. Why should I be loyal to this organization or this executive team?
Could you tell us some of the levers of cost reduction?
Sure. As we think about cost reduction, we'd like to think of cost reductions in terms of levers organizations can pull. So what's a lever? It's a technique essentially to apply and to be able to take the cost out of the organization by restructuring, by changing the way the organization works or the work is done. One common, perhaps too common, lever is outsourcing. Right? As companies outsource some of their work to a provider, they can reduce their employee headcount and ideally they reduce their cost of performing that work too. Another lever I can give is the classic process improvement techniques or automation, right? Improving the way processes work by automating them. Another lever is going to be around going after your sourcing. I'm going to call it strategic sourcing, going after the services or the products you buy from outside, and can you buy them cheaper, better, more effectively, more efficiently. So those are the types of levers that organizations can pull. We have 9 levers that we discuss in the book. The way we like to think about it is so these 9 levers, there are 2 elements to them. The one is that they come at different levels, and by that what I mean is some levers question what the company does. So business portfolio optimization or zero-basing your capabilities. It is about what you do as an organization. What are the products, services, customers, markets that you serve? And what are the capabilities that you prioritize and deprioritize? And by changing those, you can affect an organization's cost structure significantly. A second order of levers are around where you do things, where in the organization you do things, or where in the world, what geography do you do those things. So we talk about an operating model as a lever that talks about how companies standardize or customize their work or centralize or decentralize their work. Do they then consolidate, or do they just embed work in different parts of the organization? By changing the way they look at it, what's standard, what's shared, what's embedded and not, it can unlock a lot of cost-saving opportunities, scale opportunities, consolidation opportunities, or outsourcing, offshoring, or footprint optimization. Where in the world are your offices or your manufacturing plants located? Are they close enough to the customers? Are they located in the right places with access to, say, raw materials or customer segments or employee base, talent base? And then a third set of levers is around how well are things done. So this is where process improvement or automation or sourcing comes in place. And these levers talk about execution of the work that you're performing. So going from the top, to what you do, to where you do it, to how you do it, we then say, do these all at the same time, as much as possible, right? You address what you do, then you address where you do it, and then you address how well you do it. By combining all these levers, it's a force multiplier. They work much better together. If you go aggressively, you can reduce your cost by 25, 30, 35%. And that might be quite aggressive in some cases, but pulling those levers in concert with each other in the right ways can enable an organization to reduce their cost structure significantly. So some executives choose to take it to the bottom line, and others may also reinvest some of it back into the growth, into the company.
Obviously, there's risks associated with this, but you're saying if all three are done at the same time, you have minimized that risk.
Yeah, it is. There are, of course, execution risks. A lot of things can go wrong, right? You have to plan right, you have to execute right. I guess the one big risk is around how your organization is going to react to this and how they're going to come along or not, right? As we're talking about, say, perhaps centralizing work, it means people in remote offices, they may not come along, right? So it does mean job losses for those people. So how do you manage that change? Or if you're talking about outsourcing work, it may affect even a larger number of your employees, and how do you manage that for both the people who are leaving the company, but also those left behind? So there are inherent risks in any type of major change initiative in a company, and we can talk a little bit about how to manage those risks. And so it starts with the candid discussion that we talked about earlier, that the executive team must paint a positive picture, a positive vision of the future. Why are we doing this? Why is this the right thing? Why should I believe you that this is the last time we're going to have to do something like this, right? Other management teams, other CEOs came and went, and they told us similar things, and here we are again, and here we go again, right? So you have to be true to yourself. You have to be true to your organization and tell them why are you doing this and why this is going to be really the last time to do it and why this is different this time. And then you have to take them through the journey. And at every step of the journey, everybody must see that you're in this together. You're in this together, that you're going through the journey together. Everything is being looked at objectively. No favorites here in terms of nobody's being exempted. But absolutely you have to pick and choose where you invest in and then where you cut back more aggressively so that you can actually drive towards that more positive future. And when employees see it, they recognize it. They recognize that it's different. Oh, this is not just lip service. We are actually looking to change the company. It is actually much more hopeful. And who comes to work just go through the grind day after day after day, right? Who likes to be in an organization that's struggling and perhaps in a vicious cycle to the circle of doom, right? They can see the performance getting worse and worse. They're not going anywhere. It's not hopeful, it's not optimistic, it's not a fun place to work for employees either. By being able to move the organization from the weaker position they're in today to a stronger position, even if it might be a smaller one for a little while, so you can take a step back and regroup and then move forward stronger, that's much more optimistic. That's much more, gives people the hope and the excitement to come back to work, right, and drive to the future. That's what we recommend executives do.
Zero basing.
Yes.
I know you mentioned a little earlier that there are certain things that are kind of elements that must stay within a company, but and when you're talking about getting fit,
Yes.
Is everything potentially up on the chopping block?
Yes, maybe I'll rephrase it slightly differently. Everything is on the evaluation block, right? So we recommend executives look at everything they do in their organization. And the metaphor we use sometimes is the parking lot. That if you were, for example, moving to a new office building, a new headquarters perhaps, put everything you do today into the parking lot before you move into that new building. What would you bring into that new building that's consistent with your future? Leave some of the baggage behind, right? Don't be wedded to the past, but what do you need to do going forward? And that's what zero basing is about, right? There's a systematic process that you can go through to look at everything you do in the organization today and how much of what you're doing today fits with your growth priorities, your differentiating capabilities versus the bare necessities, the light sign capabilities or the table stakes. And then, does that make sense? Are you spending your resources? Are you putting your resources in the right places and the right amounts? And if not, do you need to shift somehow? Do you need to cut on the areas that matter less? Do you need to invest more in the areas that matter more? And so that's, in a nutshell, that's the zero basing process. It can be quite rigorous. There can be quite a lot of analytics behind it. We see companies sometimes get bogged down into the minutiae, but it doesn't have to be that way. But it is simply about evaluating what you need to do going forward.
And everything.
And everything is on the evaluation block.
Aligning the operational model. You mentioned that it is an opportunity to redefine how critical work gets done.
Yes, it is about defining organizational boundaries, organizational roles and responsibilities. As we think about a company, what work gets done where, by who, and how, right? The operating model defines the relationship among the various components of an organization, the building blocks of an organization. What does our finance organization do? What does our sales organization do? What does marketing do? Do I have a business unit that's focused on a certain product, or maybe a customer segment or a geography? Do I have, say, a North America business unit? Or do I have products in North America that somehow need to be tied together? So that's ultimately, that is the operating model. How is our organization put together? And how do these building blocks work together? And who's going to do what? Who's got what decision rights? Who's going to be accountable for what? What are our responsibilities to each other? A lot of times, those are not spoken out loud explicitly, and there's a lot of assumptions. Executives assume, I have this responsibility, but I don't have that. And often they're right, but frequently things fall through the cracks too. The operating model isn't clearly defined, and it creates tension in the organization. Either some things don't get done, or multiple people think it's their responsibility, and then tensions rise in the organization. So that's what we look to do with clarifying as a lever, the operating model. When you redefine what work gets done where, it opens up possibilities. By consolidating, centralizing work, you might be able to take advantage of scale opportunities, scale efficiencies. By consolidating work from perhaps high-cost locations into low-cost locations, you might be able to save some money. High-cost real estate goes away. You locate work in lower-cost office buildings in lower-cost cities, perhaps, and perhaps access to lower-cost labor force as well. So, operating model is important to define how well an organization works, but also opens up possibilities to operate at a lower cost.
Outsourcing today, it seemed as it's just like a dirty word, only because we're in the America First. So how would a company that's getting fit for growth even approach that part of maybe reorganization in today's climate?
Let me differentiate outsourcing and offshoring. Right? Outsourcing is simply giving work to a third party, which could be located in the U.S. and onshore. Offshoring, even if you keep the work in your company, you might move some of your work to, say, if you have offices in India or in Eastern Europe or Mexico, right? Ford moves a plant to Mexico, even if it's their plant, it is offshoring jobs to another country. And certainly within this administration, there's a lot of emphasis on keeping jobs onshore and not taking them outside of the U.S. Outsourcing can be a valuable tool, right? It helps organizations manage their cost structure, access scale and capabilities of a service provider they themselves may not have. This is especially true for smaller and middle-sized organizations that perhaps do not have access to the same capabilities as larger organizations. And when it's done right, it is actually a very powerful tool for many organizations. Of course, it does have an adverse impact on the employees who are being let go. And the theory of the case used to be that, hey, we're going to outsource these jobs and then we're going to retrain our workforce and they're going to move on to more skilled jobs and they're going to get paid more themselves too. It worked for some. It unfortunately hasn't worked for many others. So we did shed some of those lower skilled jobs, and unfortunately some of those people have remained unemployed while others have gotten trained and moved on to bigger, better, higher paying jobs. So it is not a lever without a social consciousness to it, clearly, and not to be undertaken lightly. And we do work with clients. Some executives do shy away from outsourcing for exactly that reason. They do worry about their employee population and they make choices not to do it.
You said part of cost cutting is evaluating your physical space.
Yes.
Maybe the building on Park Avenue may not work for you. Maybe you need to go down to the Village or something like that. And so that's also part of Fit for Growth, evaluating that.
It is. And we do look at footprint of a company, an organization, and it is the footprint for their operations, their manufacturing plants, their warehouses. For retailers, for example, you can think of where they locate their stores, how many stores they have and how many can they actually carry. And it is a very disturbing trend these days. So many retailers are closing their stores and affecting so many employees as the threat of online increases and consumers are becoming more and more picky. We also look at office space, their general administrative support, or their R&D research centers, and where they're located. It is a it is a balancing act. Labor cost is one factor, right? Do you need the labor cost in New York for more basic jobs, or can you locate them in a lower cost location in perhaps Columbus, Ohio, or Omaha, Nebraska, or other Lincoln, Nebraska, or other cities? It is a balancing act. You need to understand the type of the work and what's important to you. With manufacturing plants or warehouses, proximity to raw materials or suppliers comes into play, or the distribution to your end customers comes into play. So, as well as labor costs and other infrastructure issues. With office space, rent is one aspect of it, but access to talent. Do you have the right resources for the types of jobs you want to locate in this location? That comes into play. And if companies want to actually relocate jobs into different cities, then comes into other choices in terms of what's the transportation availability, what's the lifestyle, for example. Do I want to locate my offices here? What's the school system like? Do I like the general, what do I do on the weekends in this city? And taxes come into play too, tax in terms of incentives, and what are the local, state taxes, and can I get any incentives to help me alleviate some of my transition costs, or perhaps give me a little bit of a boost. So it's a multifaceted question. We do recommend organizations take a look at it critically every so often to make sure they are indeed located in the right places. But a lot goes into figuring out where to be located.
How is technology helping businesses in rationalization? How will you justify the costs involved in deployment of technology?
So technology is it's always been a question, right? And it's even accelerating even more and more these days with new, really powerful emerging technologies. With robotics is coming into administrative work, robotics process administration, or we're hearing more and more about machine learning or artificial intelligence, and how that's going to perhaps change. Fintech is another area, especially in financial services. A lot of the advice and counsel and direction we used to get from high-paid brokers or advisors, how much of that can be automated and delivered to consumers, for example, and just bypass a very high-cost, expensive resource. So long story short, there's a lot changing in the technology landscape. And the way we look at it, going back to the Fit for Growth principles, what are the capabilities? What is your cost structure? What's your organization? Is technology going to be one of the capability areas for you as an organization to invest in? Or is it going to be simply a tool for you to manage your cost structure? Are you going to automate your processes? Are you going to put more information on your websites and cut out the work that employees used to do, and then perhaps have your customers, your suppliers do it for themselves, self-service directly? So how much of this is about a critical capability that's going to fuel your growth into the future, or how much is this about a lever, a tool to help you manage your cost structure as efficiently as possible? So as organizations look at where they invest their money, so they have to keep those overarching questions in mind, and then specifically when it comes to investing a certain tool, then it goes back to the basic financial principles. What's this costing me? And what am I going to get in return? Am I really confident in the revenue projections that I'm getting? That because we see a lot of times they don't materialize as optimistically as they were projected. Or how confident am I that I'm going to really get the cost reductions out? And then what's the payback ultimately? Is this I'm going to spend $10 million to put in a high-cost, high-end tool. What am I saving? $2 million a year? Is this really worth it? So then comes back to hard-nosed financial projections, evaluations, and the business case behind it. So think about what technology means for you. Is it a capability or is it a tool? How important is it to invest in? And is there a financial case behind it?
It's interesting. You wouldn't automatically say yes when it comes to technology. Everyone's screaming yes.
That is one of the fallacies that we do see. That it seems like a lot of companies think that it's the silver bullet. It's their panacea. If only we had more technology, we would be so much better. And why couldn't we invest? Let's spend the money in. And one executive told me once, one chief accounting officer, if I believed all these business cases that came in front of me, we would have twice the revenue and we would have 5 employees in the company. And this is a Fortune 100 company that they have thousands of employees, right? So they're making the point that there's all these rosy projections. We're going to improve our revenue so much. This is going to reduce our cost structure by so much. And then they don't materialize. But you've spent the money, right? You've spent the money, it's added to your costs, but you're not getting the return behind it. So executives, especially in finance, CFOs and accounting officers, they have to be very diligent to make sure the projections are realistic, they're really going to get the return. So yes, technology is a powerful tool, but we don't have unlimited resources. We have to invest in where they make the most difference, where they support the company's growth in the best way.
Cost transformation,
Yes.
mobilizing, scaling, sustaining. What will happen if a company can't conquer all three together?
Yes.
Is there the sequence that you refer
Yes,
to?
it is important to get all three right, and in that sequence. Ultimately, if you don't do it all right, it's going to fail either along the way, or it's going to fail shortly after, and then the costs are going to creep back up. So you have to mobilize the organization. We spoke a little bit about that early on, that the organization has to see the rationale, has to understand why now, why this, and why this is better. And then they must come on board so that they actually are supportive and they're looking to make it happen. And then as you scale up, right, the scaling goes from the initial, say, the top 10, 20, 30 people in the organization, the executive team, to the broader organization, to the middle managers, to the front line, as they get more engaged in the process and become part of the solution. And then they are actually helping shape the future, right? And then ultimately it moves into the sustaining phase of the effort, that we are implementing the changes, we're changing processes, we are changing our tools, we are changing the way we work together. We are a learning organization, we are evolving in our journey. Right? Only then it becomes sustainable. If you can't mobilize, you're dead on arrival in the first place. If you can't scale up, the top 30 people cannot do everything in the organization by themselves. They need the organization. If they can't scale up, it's not going to get farther. And if it's not sustained, that's ultimately a lot of wasted effort. So you have to do all three in the sequence.
If you're suggesting a lot of change, many people, of course, we know, human nature,
Yes.
they don't like change. What does this do to employee morale, and how can you combat that?
It is any type of major change. You will find a lot of skeptical people in the organization. They'll be jaded. They'll be cynical. Right? We've done a lot in the past, and here we go again, one more time. And what's different about this? So this is where the CEO and the executive team come into play, that they have to forcefully make the case. They have to be compelling, they have to be convincing. Only the CEO can really make the case for a major organizational restructuring. The absence of the CEO in such a communication speaks volumes. That if it is a CFO or a COO making the case for the organization, employees see it. Right? Hey, if this was really truly the most important thing we're doing, why is the CEO not visibly behind this? Is there something that they're not telling us? So start with that. And then drive the change in the organization through the scaling and through the sustaining way that we talked about. It's really important to paint the positive vision of the future. You can drive the organization with sticks, with fear, only so far. They have to see the carrots, and they have to see the optimism. Right? They have to believe in it. They have to come along. You can only beat them up so much for subordination, right? And if they don't believe it, they don't have their hearts in it. They're not going to come along with you. So the change is difficult. It can be difficult. We shouldn't minimize it. We should recognize it. We should address it head on. For us to manage the change effectively, we leverage the culture of the organization. What makes this organization unique? Why are people working in this company? What are they proud of working in this company? Even in some of these beaten down companies, people are indeed proud of something about their organization. They believed it in the first place for some reason, right? That they like what the company stands for. They like what the company does. They like how the company serves customers or the community. There's something they liked about it beyond the paycheck. So can we tap into that latent energy, even if it might be buried under one or two layers, because a lot has happened, but how can we tap into that excitement in the company? What are these employees proud of, and how can we bring it forward and say, the changes that we're making are indeed about making this company better, and here's how it's going to be better. And then tap into that pride in the organization and what the employees are excited about. Why do they come to work? So that we can use the culture as a source of energy. Right? We can use the culture to enable the change, accelerate the change, and eventually sustain the change. And the way we do that is by identifying that pride, the motivating factors in the organization, and then figure out how we tap into it through the middle layers in the organization, through the front line in the organization, not just the CEO or the executive committee signing out memos, but these people living it day to day, right? And demonstrating those behaviors. And then ultimately seeing that what the executive company speaks is indeed what gets done. So they're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. The changes are indeed happening, and it is indeed about making the company better. Right? If not, people will sail through it very quickly, and that's what breeds the cynicism and the scare in the organization.
I just think how important company culture is. It
Oh,
really goes
absolutely.
back to that, because that way it does help you make the change. I mean,
It
that
does.
has to already be there
It does.
before any of this.
Absolutely. And it's culture is one of these areas that seems to have a easy blame, right? Tend to turn around and say, well, that's our culture, we're just a horrible company. It's a very easy aspect to blame, but the truth is, no culture is great or absolutely horrible. Every culture has strengths and every culture has some weaknesses. So when we go through a change like this with a client, we try to find the strengths in the culture. What are the strengths? What's going to help you? And then what are the weaknesses in your culture? Right. So sometimes, let me give you an example that we are a company. They have culture. Every company has cultural traits. So one could be about being entrepreneurial. And so entrepreneurial means great. The strength is that people take initiative and people try to innovate and do things for the company, for their customers, for each other. The flip side of entrepreneurial, the flip side of the coin can be we don't follow standards. We don't like to fit into a certain definition. We like to do things our own way. And when you're going through a change, it's great to be able to tap into that motivation or the excitement about the entrepreneurship and the ownership and the drive and the innovation. But somehow you need to get under control that individuality that, hey, we're going through a change. We do need to follow certain things. So it is indeed about that, right? Let's tap into that positive, the strength, and then let's figure out a way to at least minimize the negative impacts of some of the challenges that we have in our culture. So no culture is absolutely great. No culture is absolutely horrible. Find the strengths and then somehow fix the challenges.
What are the ways of tracking the impact?
Yes.
Or benefits of cost reduction?
Sure.
Are there any specific tools that we can learn and look for to make sure and see, hey, this is working?
I'll say there are two ways to do it, and both need to be done at the same time. One is going to be, I'll call it a more bottom-up view of the tracking the change. That when you go through a change initiative like this, you're going to end up with projects that come out of it. Instead of, this is not going to be one big transformation. It is a one big transformation that will have 20, 30, 40 projects underneath it. So you need to track all these projects and track them in the way that you track actions. Are we doing what we said we would do? And then you track outcomes. Are we getting the results we thought we would? And then you report the results out of that. Okay, so what do we get? Are we reducing our cost structure, or was this something about improving productivity? Or something else. Whatever it is, you need to define those metrics up front. Cost reduction, efficiency improvement, effectiveness. Are we doing it faster, or are we doing it with fewer errors, for example? So it's not just about dollars. It could be about productivity. It could be about quality or speed. So track those initiatives at the initiative level with specific metrics and then see if they're actually tallying up. The second aspect of this, you have to do this too, is the top-down. If we were spending, say, $200 million in a company, decent-sized company, and we said we were going to reduce our costs by $40 million. Are we seeing the $200 million go down to $160 million? Are we really seeing that $40 million of savings come out? We're doing this bottom-up, right? We're doing all these initiatives, the 30, 40 initiatives, the projects that are happening, and they might all be on track and all agree, and yes, they are getting the savings out. But when you look at the top-down, does it add up? Does it actually show that we are saving? So sometimes what happens is, in one part of the organization we do this project and save a lot of money. In another part, somebody else is adding costs, or somehow those costs are getting shifted, that the chairs are moving around, but they're still on the deck of Titanic, right? So the costs are not really coming out of the organization. They might be being just reshuffled. So you need to keep track of it at the top level. Are we getting the overall results we aspire to get? But you have to very rigorously track it at the bottom-up level, at the project level, that we're doing all the things we said we would do, and all those things are actually working out the way we intended them to.
So that means it's still working.
It is still working, but sometimes if it's not showing up at the top-level results, why is that not showing up, right? There's leakage. That are we simply squeezing the balloon? So it's, we're squeezing this side of the balloon, and somehow it's moving over here. Right? So the costs are still in the organization. When Wall Street looks at your profitability, your earnings per share, that number is not changing. Ultimately, that's not going to be a success measure. Now, the difference here is, if you made a choice consciously, the fit for growth approach advocates you take the costs out in places that matter less, and then you invest them back in areas that matter more. So are the costs that you took out, are they ending up in the places you meant for them to be? That's okay then, because that was exactly our plan, our strategy, and we're getting the costs out in places that matter less, and we're investing in the places that matter more. But then, you're not seeing the result in the cost, but eventually you have to see the result in revenue, right? That was the plan. By investing in the growth, we're going to grow, and that's going to come up in revenue. Is it coming up? And go back to the same question, are we doing the things we said we would do? We are investing in the capabilities we wanted to. Are we getting the results for it? Our capabilities are now strong, and here's the revenue as a result of that. If not, where's the breakdown and what do we need to address?
You've worked with many businesses. Can you talk about one that made the transformation?
Well, we work with a retailer, and this retailer was at a pivotal moment in their history that they had grown dramatically by opening a lot of new stores. Over the course of 7-8 years, they doubled up their store count. And that was their growth strategy. And they wanted to grow by opening new stores. And they were very successful at it. And they achieved their objective. At the time, they had a strong capability system around identifying where to locate stores, their market planning and research. They were great at actually developing the real estate, acquire the property, design the store, construct the store, and then open it up. They were great at recruiting, right? To be able to double up your store count means you have to double up your store managers, your assistant managers, employees in those stores. So they were great at recruiting. They were great at supply chain management, right? To be able to supply twice the volume of products through your supply chain, they had to manage it very efficiently. So they had a very strong capability system around market planning and research, real estate development, construction, training, recruiting, training, and supply chain management. But they achieved their strategy, right? They were run out of store space to actually buy and locate new stores. That growth strategy was expiring. So they wanted to focus on customer experience and to be able to get more out of their existing store base. Now, they made one big mistake. As they were approaching the tip of their growth curve, as they were slowing down their growth curve, they began to invest in store labor. They began to add more store labor in hopes that if we have more employees in our stores, they're going to have more time to support our customers. It's going to result in better experience. It's going to result in better revenue. It did not pan out that way. They added labor. Somehow the chain broke down. They did not get to more revenue. Either the labor did not deliver the experience, or the customers didn't care about the experience, or even if they cared about the experience, it didn't result in revenue. So they added cost, but they didn't get the revenue for it, and their profitability hurt. Their stock price suffered badly for it. And so they hired us to help them with a Fit for Growth transformation. So what do we do now? How do we get around this? And they were starting in a hole, right? Because they added labor, they had a high cost, and they didn't get the revenue. So they needed to cut costs, and then they needed to invest in growth at the same time. It's a double whammy, right? They were going to spend more money that they didn't have in the first place. So how do we take costs out of from areas that matter less and invest in areas that matter more? The new strategy called for investing in their merchandising capabilities. How do they make sure they put the right products on the shelves in their stores so the customers like them and buy them? How do they price them right? How do they promote them right? They were investing in customer experience, customer insights, customer loyalty, and they were investing in their website to be able to serve the customers even if they're not in the stores. All that needed money to be able to invest in. So we work with them to take cost out from areas that matter less. We zero-based their headquarters. So the real estate department was much less important going forward. So we reduced the size of the real estate department. Eventually, they outsourced it, right? We also looked at all the other functions in the headquarters and process improvement, automation. We managed to get costs out of the headquarters. We worked with their suppliers, the indirect sourcing. They were able to take significant cost out by consolidating suppliers, doing better negotiating with suppliers, changing what they buy at lower cost. And now we addressed store labor. What are they doing in the stores? What's driven by the headquarters requirements versus what truly needs to happen? And doing all of that gave them a lot of free cash, about a quarter of which they invested into the new capabilities they needed. So that was one big change. The second aspect of this change was the field employees, the store employees, especially store managers. The emphasis was on customer experience, which meant employees in the stores need to serve customers a better way. So they invested heavily into training their store employees, especially their store managers, and some of the other key roles in the stores. They spent a lot of money. About a quarter of the investments they made were actually going into the stores to training their employees. They invested heavily into some of their physical stores. They remodeled their stores to make them more inviting, approachable for their customers. Now, one big change they also made was changing the way they measured their store managers. They used to be measured on, say, profitability and sales only. They started measuring them on customer experience as well, explicitly. And they trained them heavily on customer experience, and they changed the support system behind it. So this company that had suffered from a high-cost situation, that needed new capabilities, was able to cut costs and invest in the growth and change their organization to drive a much more customer-centric organization that got more out of their store base. They're still going through the journey. They made a lot of progress. They've seen the fruits of the journey so far. But if you spoke to them, they would say they're halfway there, right? They're still learning. They're still looking for ways to improve their performance.
That's a great story. And they still kept the customer experience model because they really felt that was strong.
Yes. The customer experience, the way they measured it, has gone up by about 20-25% from a starting point. Yeah. So they're making significant improvement.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. This has been my pleasure.
Join us next time on Starter TV, where creative thinkers come to share new ideas. I'm Vanessa Tyler. See you next time.